You have the floor.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My audio is working. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right off then, so we can get started. Okay. And can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Is that working? Okay, good. So hello, everyone. My name is Paul Sevigny, and I'm a lecturer at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. And today we're talking about bilingual graded readers, literature circles, and identities. And with me, I have...
I'm Julia Lindsay. I'm a student of APU, currently majoring in Asia Pacific Studies, and I'm a research assistant for this project.
And I'm Hidaka. I'm a student from APU, also majoring in Asia Pacific Studies and part of this project as a research assistant.
Okay, great. And so we have a 3-year grant that just started this year, and that grant is for developing bilingual graded readers and also leadership skills for literacy workers. And so we're going to get started. And let's see if I can figure this out. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to explain the context of APU. Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific Universities is one of the top 30 universities in Japan and the leading EMI university that has a culturally diverse environment. It boasts about 6,000 students, with half of that population being international students hailing from 91 countries, and the other half being domestic students from all over Japan. In APU, students can either be English-based students, where they take classes in the medium of English, or Japanese basis, where they take classes in the medium of Japanese.
And in APU, we have something called Multicultural Week. Multicultural weeks are dedicated to representing variety of culture or languages from different countries and regions throughout week-long events. Multicultural weeks take place in spring and fall semester, run by students themselves. The point of the cultural weeks is to introduce various cultures and encourage cultural diversity. During multicultural weeks, students are invited to participate in the offerings of the multicultural weeks for an immersion in the experience. Students can participate any weeks, regardless their nationalities. On the final day of the week, a lot of people, not only students, but from outside of university, come and see the ground show, a major theater performance that takes place typically on Friday evenings. The performances usually adapt folk tales written by authentic voices, put together the collaborative efforts of APU students, embassies, and other sources.
And so our project is our grant project is developing bilingual short stories and community literacy activists. And so our goal over the next 3 years is to create an anthology of at least 6 bilingual short stories that are loosely based upon grand show scripts or the grand show themes from different cultures represented at APU. And also to develop research assistants, we have 10 community literacy activists, students per semester who are learning to author cultural stories, translate them, grade them, illustrate them. Different students are doing different parts of these jobs, and also leading bilingual exchange discussions, which we're going to talk about more today.
Okay, so we're going to take a COVID-19 detour. Originally, this research was actually meant to be situated in face-to-face classroom settings. But on the 1st of April this year, when this research proposal was finally accepted, we knew this entire semester would be completely online based. So we have officially developed a bilingual Zoom-based discussion system. While the CLA members are working on drafts of 3 new bilingual short stories this semester, we've been working on a pre-beta interlinear version of said system in order to build our process. Thus, the discussion we report on today is actually based upon an existing graded story solely for research purposes.
Sorry, I was muted. So we've started working on our project since June, and it's been 7 weeks so far. And we've been working so far for the developing our process. First, recruit Culture Week leaders to be CLAs, and then get permission to retell grand show stories, and recruit Japanese and English writers, and then develop a writing process, a translation process, and a grading process, and finally develop bilingual discussion systems.
Okay. And so we started for research purposes using a story called Mr. Harris and the Night Train by Jennifer Bassett. And we chose this story because we've used it in a lot of our classes with literature circles at lower levels in English before. And so since we knew it was the right level for students at APU in the intermediate level classes where we're pitching our materials, the CLAs worked on translating that story so that we could understand a process among ourselves and how that would work. And so the students worked on translating roughly paragraph by paragraph and sentence by sentence in a form that wasn't too, not too polite. The students expressed a lot of interest in wanting to learn Japanese language or English language that they could use in speaking with their friends. And so that seemed to be a strong interest on the part of our leaders. And APU, because it's a dual language university, we have a very unique class format called an exchange class. And those exchange classes are 95 minutes. And we bring together students learning English with students learning Japanese. So 25 of each, and it might be 50 students in a large room when we're all face to face. So we've been working on creating a bilingual book club format for that 95-minute exchange class. So for example, it could start with English or Japanese, but we're gonna start here in this slide, just showing how it would go from, if the first half of class were in English, then we take a break and the second half of class is in Japanese. And we decided to break down the first half of class, both halves of class the same way. So we have peer coaching or peer mentoring during the first 10 minutes, and then the literature circle discussion in a main session, and then a feedback session in breakout room. And so basically the whole class is learning how to do book clubs in your second language. And the second half of class would be in Japanese, and it's also involving the same story. So this is different than extensive reading like Richard Day was talking about today, where all students are reading different books and different materials. All the students in this class will have read the same story, and they're all at the same proficiency roughly of learning. And for this pilot study that we did today, we had 5 learners of Japanese and 5 learners of English, and they all read Mr. Harris and the Night Train in English and Japanese and prepared for one role in their target language. And we did use a sort of adapted role-based literature circle system that started with Mark Furr's system in 2007 that came out with his book, teacher's book. And let's see, am I still talking here? Yeah, so if we zoom in on half the class, then the first 10 minutes is peer mentoring or peer coaching. Like, we use those phrases interchangeably. So, and on Zoom, I just simply made 5 breakout rooms. And then the students were in a pair in their breakout room, and the mentor helped the mentee to understand and prepare for the discussion. They clarified role responsibilities and answered questions about language. And then they would go to the literature circle discussion in the main session, and the 5 English learners in the first half would be discussing on Zoom. And the 5 mentors were also there, but listening to their partners and taking notes while the discussion was going on. And then we would go back to breakout sessions for the last 10 minutes, with your same partner, and you listen to the speaker's reflections on handling their role, and then their partner would give them feedback on how it went and answer any other questions they had. So to zoom in a little bit more, if you look at the breakout rooms and how that they were paired, you can see that in the first half of class, for example, these are all pseudonyms, Vanessa and Naomi were paired together, and Naomi was preparing to be the discussion leader, and then Harley and Tim were together, and Tim was preparing to be the word master / concept developer, and so forth. And then those same pairs met together for the Japanese half of class in the second part. But in that case, Vanessa was the learner of Japanese, and she had a different role. She had the character tracer role, and Naomi was her coach. So you can kind of see how that worked so basically you had a main session, and then I had 5 breakout rooms for the pairs, and it was really easy to put people back in the breakout rooms for these peer coaching and feedback sessions. And May, this is you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sevigny. Okay, so as Mr. Sevigny has explained, during the literary circle discussion time, 5 learners were talking and their partners were listening with their video and audio turned off for each of 2 sessions. Their partners were listening in silence so they could give feedback to their respective partners about their performance after the end of each session. Both sessions were entirely recorded, including the coaching and the feedback sessions that took place in separate private breakout rooms for the sake of later evaluation. So with the discussion conducted, the results and consequences were taken into deep thought and carefully evaluated. We looked to both practical and technological reflections and have concluded with some rather interesting and valuable information. From here on, we will be dividing the results into pros and cons and report on them individually. So let's start with the pros. We concluded that the interlinear version allows for quick sentence-by-sentence comparisons, followed by the fact that it had also helped students take notice of polysemous vocabulary and to be able to infer word meanings. Students in charge of the English version were mostly already familiar with the vocabulary as well. Next slide, please. Next up is the cons. Students in charge of the Japanese version had reported that because they had referred to mostly only the L1 text before the discussion, they found themselves too heavily dependent on the L1 text. Thus, their knowledge and ability to work on discussing the text was limited to their reading and understanding of the L1 text, and so they had requested to be able to view the L2 text properly before discussions. Additionally, not all of them could understand the kanji that was used in the L2 text, so it made understanding the text significantly more difficult compared to the students in charge of the English version. Next slide, please. In other aspects, some students have also added to their concern of not being able to understand all the kanji in the L2 version that they would like to be able to have furigana. And because not all of them have the same level of knowledge when it comes to kanji. We also found that Ritsumeikan doesn't work with OneNote for reading kanji at all. Students of the Japanese session have also requested for a way to be able to extract all the kanji from the L2 text onto flashcards for further study later on.
Okay, and so after trying out this interlinear text experience with the students, we came up with what might be a more ideal way to use an interlinear text that we're making ourselves for exchange class. And that would be, when May was saying the proper way to view the L2 text, what our students were asking for was they wanted to receive the Japanese version only for students of Japanese before class, and not get the interlinear text side by side, actually before class. Same then would go for before class for the learners of English. They would get just the English version of the story before class and the roll sheets, and they would prepare in English before class with those. And then when they get to the exchange class, then they actually receive this center interlinear text. And also the students said they really wanted to have like all of the line numbers clearly labeled with numbers in both English and Japanese. So it's really easy to compare the texts in their peer mentoring or feedback sessions so that they would have an easy time making intertextual references. And so I thought that was interesting that they would want the text to be distributed in a certain way.
Okay, here are language moves noticed in mentoring session. Noticeable words they used during the sessions are written the right side. And for the discussion later mentoring session, they put focus on deciding how to start the discussion, decide the order of the roles, referring to the role sheet, determine the warm-up questions are appropriate, considering the level of the questions. For word master mentoring session, they put focus on rehearsing the introduction, the contributions with partner, noticing spelling, unknown meanings, pronunciation, and they were checking that certain words are commonly used or not. And they also try to identify concept word, trying out conjectures of how to express the theme and getting feedback from the coach.
Mm-hmm.
And the next slide, please.
Okay.
And now here is this peer mentoring phase affordances. So peer sessions worked well and gave opportunities to understand accomplishing their roles, overcome anxiety, how to get started, helped with vocabulary by making sure during the sessions, rule out strategies that would take too much time since the discussion was only for 20 minutes, and helped to provide questions that would work or might not work for audience. Participants were given different roles to the pairs for each of the LCs, and this created some confusion regarding who had which role and when, but it required engagement.
Okay, and so how did the participate in the bilingual L2LC contribute to your bilingual academic identity was a question that I asked the CLAs to discuss, and also how did it not help? And interestingly, I think this is, I've seen this in several levels of research on literature circles, that the students really like relating to personal experience, their personal experience that their classmates bring to a topic or a story, and hearing about each other's personal experience and trying to express their own experience as related to a story helped them feel they were building their bilingual identity. And also hearing their classmates' personal experiences related to the text, also they felt helped enhance their comprehension of the story. And let's see. The other thing is that I noticed as a researcher of literature circles for quite a while is that by having the peer feedback sessions and the mentoring sessions, they actually attained higher levels of interpretation and contributions that I've seen before when we don't have those kind of planning sessions and feedback sessions. So I think that was a good outcome for the learners. And Risa?
Yes, so the feedback session certainly helped participants to realize what they could accomplish in the sessions. And as it on the slide, the feedback session after the LC allowed the mentee to gain valuable advice on how to perform the role and insights into the language.
Okay, so when it comes to how bilingual interlinear reading did not help, we're going to take a look at the duality of the role-based system. To put it simply, it's like a double-edged sword. On one surface, learning roles would help students to enact social identities needed for discussion. What we mean by social identities is we're referring to roles that were developed and assigned based on the aspects of one's social identity. Take it in mind once more that this is a discussion that involves members from all sorts of backgrounds, with varying levels of knowledge for each person. That meant that we needed to take into consideration the aspect of everyone's personal brand in order to ensure everyone stays on the same wavelength. Say we take one participant as an example who is Japanese and whose English level is foundation at best. Her knowledge when it comes to English simply doesn't match those of her peers. To bring out her full best potential, we assign her a role that would accommodate her level of English while enabling her to perform at a pace that would match everyone else's. This goes the same for everyone else. On the other surface of the sword, however, we see that role-based system can limit students in the contributions they can make during the discussion. For example, the role of an experienced connector carries the responsibility of connecting the events or themes in the story to one's own personal experiences. For the sake of greater understanding, of course. However, that will mean that the experienced connector is limited to talking only about their own experiences and anything else that's related to it. When a role is assigned, students are restrained by the boundaries of their roles. So anything valuable they could have contributed to the discussion may have been held back because they felt that it didn't comply with their respective roles.
Okay, and so we've talked about how this bilingual literature circle went on Zoom in this pilot mode, and we're kind of now coming to the end of this presentation, and we're thinking about what's next for us, since we're really at a preliminary stage of developing new literature circle discussion systems. We, for example, are thinking about exploring different story formats. So for example, the students are interested in potentially writing one of their graded readers as like a reading adventure story, like Paul Rain's Journey to Mars, if you guys are familiar with that, but it would be more about one of the Culture Week shows. And then also, students our leaders are interested in exploring what an agenda-based discussion would look like instead of a role-based discussion, and we want to show you a little bit what that looks like. So if we look at interpretation of a text from a theoretical perspective, Bell put together a nice way to think about levels of understanding relative to a text that one might have, starting with complete estrangement from a text and then previewing a text. Proto-understanding is really just one read through of a story, which that might be the level for extensive reading that is only required to answer quiz questions on X reading, for example, and that's probably good for extensive reading. But when students talk about a story in a post-reading activity, they're going to end up doing a lot of language internalization, and our students express that the schema activation level of talking about their own personal experiences related to a story was the really interesting part for them. And those are from Vygotsky, actually, not from Bell, but I've added them here because I think they're important for second language reading discussion. And our students were able to go much higher in and I adapted FIR's roles to actually cover all of these levels. So we could try to elicit different levels of understanding, and we tried that out in this pilot study. But our students expressed interest in a agenda-based discussion, and what we're thinking of doing next is to try a different format of homework where we train the students on kind of low level, medium level, and high level questions, and where we give them sample questions so that they can understand if they were in the phase of estrangement where maybe they hadn't had a chance to do the reading, how would they ask questions and what would they do? They might use a lot of back channeling as well, but we want to create a system to teach strategies for students who are in any of these particular phases of interpretation so that they can negotiate that phase of interpretation better. And so then our worksheet in the end might look something like this for our next study, which would be to give the students these questions, and after having trained them on what these levels are, then as they read, they come up with questions, and all the students get the same worksheet. They bring their questions to the discussion. And so we believe at CEFR B1 level that might work nicely, but we're not sure yet. So that will be our next step. And I believe that's where we are now. And these are some good references for understanding what we're doing. So I'll leave it there. And I'm hoping that we're still on time, Anne. Are we doing okay for time?
You have 4 minutes.
Perfect. Are there any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat, I don't believe. Or maybe I'm missing them. Now I see one. Okay, Greg asked a really big question. How do you organize which student should be in each group? And for this pilot study, we have a group of mixed proficiency community literacy activists or research assistants that are on our team. So I have 5 Japanese and 5 international students on the team. And that was easy for this group because it's a pilot group that we're using. But for a regular class, I actually have a really brief survey that I use with students that just, I find out their intrinsic reading motivation level, their self-efficacy for discussion, if they're a class clown, and how rigorous they are in as their habits are in doing their homework. And I usually use that survey at the beginning of the semester to just sort of get a feel for how students are. But with Zoom and breakouts being a little bit hard to handle, we've basically moved over to just random assignments for larger groups. And with an exchange class like this, we would have to actually do it manually in class, because you'd have to know who the Japanese and international students are and put them together. And so it would be more random in the Zoom format. That's a really good question. Okay. Sure. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, everybody.
So,
Thanks, Anne.
okay. Thank you, Paul, Lisa, and Julia. It's a very nice presentation. For the people in the audience, I would like everybody to unmute yourselves and open your cameras and let our speakers, our lovely speakers, show their appreciation. Okay, give a round of applause.
Thanks very much, Paul.
All right.
Julia.
Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Wow, we had 26 people here today. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Many famous people in ER are here. Okay.
Thank you for coming, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening.
It was great. I have to stop recording.